True. Nervous, very, very dreadfully, I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all, the sense of hearing was acute. I heard all things in heaven and earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. I went to stay with the old man. He had befriended me. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult, and yet he annoyed me. Why, I wondered. Then it came to me. It's his eye. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. That eye made my blood turn cold to see. It's impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. That eye disturbed me so that I decided to kill the old man and be rid of that eye forever. You should have seen how wisely and cautiously I proceeded. For 7 long nights, about midnight, I quietly entered his room, observing him while he slept. I always found the eye closed. You would have laughed to see how cunningly I operated my rehearsals. And every morning when day broke, I boldly approached the old man, asking him how he slept. He was never suspicious. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings. After the old man was asleep, I very cautiously opened his door. Once I was in his room, I was about ready to open my lantern when my thumb slipped on the thin fastening, and the old man sprang up in bed. "Who's there?" he cried out. I kept quiet, still, and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle. I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in bed listening. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or grief, oh no. It was a low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its own dreadful echo the terrors that distract me. I did not move for an hour, and he as well. Had he confessed to himself an unfounded fear and gone back to sleep? When I waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very little crevice in my lantern. You cannot imagine how stealthily I opened the lantern until at length a single dim ray of light shot out and fell full upon the vulture eye. I saw with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue, with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. It was wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. Now there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound. I knew that sound well. It was the beating of the old man's heart. Yet I kept still. I held the lantern motionless. I could see nothing else of the old man's face but his eye. The tattoo of the heart grew quicker and louder. The old man's terror must have been extreme. A new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by the neighbor. Yet for some minutes longer, I refrained and stood still. But the beating grew louder and louder. I thought the heart must burst. And now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by the neighbor. The old man's time had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and I leaped towards him. He only shrieked once, only once. I was intent on stopping that pounding heart. In an instant, I was upon him and dragged him to the floor. That heartbeat had finally stopped. The old man was dead, stone dead. If you still think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I was convinced that the eye would never disturb me again. At last I felt wonderfully free, as an eagle on a mountaintop. I then took up 3 planks of the flooring of the chamber, and in that space I deposited all the body parts. I replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stains of any kind, no blood spot, whatever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had caught it all. For the first time, I felt really free and felt tired from my labor and uneasily sleepy. Just as I had prepared for bed, there was a knock at the door. Who could that be at this late hour? Come who may, my heart is carefree. I had no worry. There entered 3 men who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by the neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office. And they, the officers, had been sent to search the premises. I smiled, for what did I have to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man I mentioned was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. At length I led them to his chamber. I showed them his treasures undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears, but still they sat and chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained strength until at length I found that noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice. Yet the sound increased. What could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor with heavy strides, and as if excited by fury, by the observations of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I was sitting and grated it upon the boards. But the noise grew louder and louder, and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no, they heard, they suspected, they knew they were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die. And now again, hark, louder. Villains, I shirked. Dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here. It is the beating of his hideous heart.